Hello, everyone. Let me get this sorted here. Hi, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us, either if you're participating with us live or watching later at your leisure. I am Kimberly from the Country Bookshop hosting in a back room. We have a figure eight book club live watch party going on. So I want to extend a welcome to those ladies and everyone in Southern Pines as well. I would like to begin my introduction by thanking these two authors, both of whom have been awarded the North Carolina Award for Literature. I will begin by thanking Jill McCorkle for working with us on this paperback tour for Hieroglyphics. It's an honor to celebrate this remarkable work with you. John Hart, I'm indebted to for his many collaborations with the Country Bookshop over the years, including several with John Grisham and the Country Bookshop, the one we did with the UNC TV and the Science Museum that was very special. Before I introduce these authors, let me introduce the Country Bookshop in downtown Southern Pines, North Carolina. We are a general bookstore for kids and adults that is part of a wonderful community who chooses to shop with us and share their stories and lives with us. The only reason that any store exists is because people choose to shop there. And I want to thank you all for your support and celebrate great books like these authors have brought to us. I will post a link to buy the book in the chat. And if you have questions as you're watching, please enter them in the Q&A section. We are unique that we are a bookstore that is part of a small, twice weekly, award-winning community newspaper called The Pilot. In full disclosure, John Hart is a close friend. I went to Woodbury of my cousin, David Warnoff's, and David is publisher of the Pilot newspaper, Walter Magazine in Raleigh, O. Henry Magazine in Greensboro, South Park Magazine in Charlotte, Pine Straw Magazine in Southern Pines and Pinehurst, and also heads Business North Carolina. And now, let me introduce you to these significant North Carolina authors. John Hart is a six-time New York Times best-selling author. He is the author of The King of Lies, Downriver, The Last Child, Iron House, Redemption Road, and The Hush. In The Unwilling, his most recent book that is a great gift for Father's Day, John Hart returns to the South, this time at the height of the Vietnam War, combining crime, suspense, and searing glimpses into the human soul, delivered with Hart's signature style. This standalone novel follows a family at war in both the past and present as they become pawns in a struggle much larger than any of them can even imagine. John Hart is the only author in history to win the Edgar Award for Best Novel consecutively. John has also won the Barry Award, the Southern Independent Booksellers Award for Fiction, the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award, and the North Carolina Award for Literature. His novels have been translated into 30 languages and can be found in more than 70 countries. Jill McCorkle's first two novels were released simultaneously when she was just out of college, and the New York Times called her a born novelist. Since then, she has published 6 novels and 4 collections of short stories, and her work has appeared in Best American Short Stories several times, as well as the Norton Anthology of Short Fiction. 5 of her books have been New York Times notable books, and her novel Life After Life was a New York Times bestseller. She has received the New England Booksellers Award, the John Dos Pezos Prize for Excellence in Literature, and also the North Carolina Award for Literature. She has written for the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, the Washington Post, the Garden and Gun, and the Atlantic, and other publications. She was a Briggs Copeland Lecturer in Fiction at Harvard, where she also chaired the Department of Creative Writing and is currently a faculty member of the Bennington College Writing Seminars and is affiliated with the MFA program at NC State. I will turn this over to y'all and thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you, Kimberly. What a pleasure to be here, and so great to get to spend time with John. So thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly, for that nice introduction. Thank you, Jill, for letting me do this. For those listening, Jill and I had the opportunity to chat for 10 or 15 minutes prior to coming on. And I I can tell you right now, this is a warm, wonderful woman. We're going to have a great conversation. She's going to have a lot of great things to say about the craft, the life of writing, and about the book Hieroglyphics, which I had the great pleasure of finishing last night. And I can tell you, if you've not read it, it's absolutely wonderful. It's beautifully done. I love your prose. I love your characters. These people are very, very real to me. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about all these things, the book, the life, and how she came to this place. But before we get into the book, Jill, because we've not spent a lot of time together, and I'm guessing that a lot of our viewers don't know as much about you as they would like, I wonder if you could just kind of give us the breakdown of how you got into this. I mean, how did you find your way to writing? I know it apparently happened when you were very young. For me, I was in my 40s before I was ever published. There were failed novels before that, but you seem to have come right out of the gate. I read that you had your first two novels published simultaneously when you were a baby. Can you tell us about that and how that felt and
Well,
what led to it?
It's one of those, I have always felt really lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, and it always felt a little like I came in the back door somehow. Louis Rubin, who founded Algonquin Books, had been my teacher when I was an undergraduate at Chapel Hill. And so he very generously continued reading my work after I had left. And so at the beginning of Algonquin, he read my first novel and said he'd like to publish it, but that he was just getting started. It was going to be a couple of years, during which time I wrote the second novel. And he and Shannon Ravenel, who ended up being my editor for 30 years until she retired, they thought, well, why not bring them out together? Which was terrifying as a young writer, knowing absolutely nothing. But people were so interested in this little tiny publishing house in the backyard of someone in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that I think the books got a lot more attention coming out that way than either might have gotten alone. So, it's my career goes hand in hand with Algonquin in many ways. I mean, the house is very, very different now and big and under a New York roof, but I'm very proud to have been part of that little backyard shed production.
Well, it's a great story, and it's a uniquely North Carolina story as
Definitely.
well, which I really love. And this is one of the things that we share is this history with the state of North Carolina, this great love of the state of North Carolina. I've not read all of your books. I can tell you that so far, everything I've ever written has been set in North Carolina. When I close my eyes, it's what I see. Even though I've been in Virginia for 10 years now, I can't imagine ever setting a novel in Virginia. Are all of your books set there? Do you travel the world in your mind and go different places?
I lived in the Boston area for 20 years. You wouldn't know it to hear me. But my children grew up in Massachusetts. And so it's been interesting. I think I brought a lot of that to Hieroglyphics because, my two of the characters, the elderly couple, both were born in Massachusetts and then have retired to Southern Pines, in fact. And I think it surprised me that after 20 years there and then coming back to North Carolina 15 years ago, I was suddenly homesick for this place that had once seemed so foreign, but I think what becomes home to our children is home. And so I have spent many years of my adult life with a foot in either camp. I never fully felt like I left North Carolina because, like you, when I close my eyes, those are the images that come to me first. And I think much of my inspiration still comes from that source. People will say, oh, your fictional town, is this Lumberton? I'm like, no, but it looks a whole lot like Lumberton. But maybe Lumberton in the 1960s and 70s when I was growing up. And I took the liberty of pushing my town a little bit closer to the coast, so it's easier to get to the water. But
I take those liberties too. And it's interesting. You talk about Boston and Southern Pines and Lumberton and these areas. It's amazing to me, this question of how much of a writer ends up in the book. I mean, obviously there's a tremendous amount of personal, emotional investment in everything that we write. And a lot of that is transferable to the page. We see it on the page. And yet there's this line that separates us as writers from the purely fictional, right? And yet in this novel, I can see, after hearing you just now, I can see this part of you that there's this tie to Boston and the Massachusetts area, and this tie to North Carolina. The book sort of straddles that line in the minds of some of your characters. And this is a great opportunity to start talking about the book, because I love this. And if any of you that have a copy of this, I don't know if it's in the hardcover or just the paperback, but Jill wrote a lovely essay in the back that gives a lot of insight into the book. And I read something in preparation for this, and I think this is a good place to bring it up. So what I want you to do is talk about sort of the inspiration of the story. There are some factual things that happened back in the 40s that really led you here, that somehow miraculously are actually grounded in these two places we're talking about. Something tragic happened up north, something tragic happened in rural Eastern North Carolina. And in your essay, you have a line, and I'm going to read it. You say, "Lives end. Time freezes. We look for clues and meaning and can't help but imagine the what ifs and if onlys. And then all those bits and pieces of life we often take for granted take on new weight and meaning." And so I wondered if in light of that, if you could just tell our viewers a little bit about the facts from history that led you to this story. And I know you have something of a personal connection to what happened in North Carolina.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, about a year apart, the Coconut Grove nightclub fire in Boston in 42, and a catastrophic train wreck in not far from Southern Pines, Renner, North Carolina, in 43. And two events that just completely pulled the whole community together, changed the course of many, many lives. If you go to either place now, it's hard to find a trace. If you walk those tracks, you would never know that such a thing had happened. And in Boston, it's hard to find the little plaque in the sidewalk that even memorializes the almost 500 lives lost that night in all of 12 minutes. So I was so focused on these short little bits of time where so much change occurs. And when you read the accounts of both events, you find these cataloged lists of the way people were identified. I mean, this is long before cell phones. You had people running telegrams back and forth trying to locate family members, to people trying to find out if their people were alive or dead. And it often came down to the inscription in a wedding ring, or a shoe, a particular kind of shoe, or a dry cleaning tag, or an appendectomy scar, something in a pocket, lots of things that mark our lives in some way or another that we just totally take for granted. And yet in the aftermath of such an event are intimate objects, and history markers in a lot of ways. So I was completely intrigued by it, but I never could imagine what I was going to do with it fictionally. Like, I had read all the books about the Coconut Grove nightclub fire years ago, and went back to those, and I I have followed regularly, because every now and then, and in fact, last summer, right when the book was first coming out, um, there was a front page story in the Boston Globe, the obituary for a man who that night was, a 17-year-old tap dancer, um, who got out, and of course then had this long life. But those stories continue to come. The people who were supposed to be there didn't go, and then likewise, like my character's mother, went without telling anyone where she was going.
So let me stop right there, because that's actually, we're going to come back to the character's mother in just a minute. But we spoke a little bit before we went live about the importance for writers to not give away the ending of a book. So I'm not going to do that, but I want to put a little context here for the viewers. And if you want to flesh it out more, you can, but just so they understand what we're talking about. The setup in this novel, and I'm going to describe this novel, and you may take issue with this, but this is how I felt when I finished it. I think the novel is a love story about life and all the things in life, the good, the bad, the regrets, everything that we experience, because a lot of the perspective is from people in their 80s nearing, some kind of ending and looking back on what's happened. And the two characters that are sort of at the heart of this in many ways, Frank and Lil, or the older couple in their 80s who've recently been transplanted to Southern Pines to be near family. But the way that they met was that, let's make sure I get this right. Frank lost his father in the train derailment, and Lil lost her mother in the coconut fire. And when they met as young people, it was ironically, and I say that based on some things that happened at the end, but they were drawn together in this place of comfort and this mutual assured grief. So as we learn about them and their families in this book, we see their lives and all of its glories and all of its ignominies. But you said, and again, going back to your essay, you said, everyone has a secret. Everyone has a memory that haunts or lingers. Everyone has the door they want to close, but for whatever reason, time continues to blow it ajar. I love that, by the way. And we talked about, for instance, Lil's mother, and Lil was young when her mother died, but she was at that club, unbeknownst to anyone in the family. She was killed in the fire, and it's an ongoing question throughout the novel. Why was she there? And in fact, I mean, so much of what builds the tension for me in this book are these questions of secrets. Everyone has a secret. Shelley, the young court stenographer who is trying very hard to raise this son alone in this town that she feels a stranger, in which she feels a stranger, they all have their secrets. So looking at what you write in your essay about secrets, and knowing, having read the book, how well you use this question of secrets to build tension and interest in the character, I wonder if you just wanted to talk a little bit about how that came to be for you. I mean, is this something that you do in all of your books, this use of, everyone's got a secret, and the novel's purpose is to sort of tug those strings and pull them out? Because that's what I found, well, one of the things I found so compelling.
I think secrets are compelling. I was thinking a lot about what gets lost of an individual's life, if we don't take the time to tell the story or explain something. Even things we don't mean to be secret would become secret. If somebody just stumbles on notes or a journal entry or something that doesn't make sense, or that they are trying to translate, as you might, some ancient language. So I was thinking of secrecy that way, but then I really do think that we all, as my character Lil says, that we're all haunted by something, either something we did or something we did not do. And I think the older I get, the longer the list, even though we try very hard not to, the letter you wish you had written to this person, and then that person is gone. And we all have those. And I don't know, I think it is enough to reveal a lot about a character, to tap into those little parts of us that linger and sort of worry, maybe even tie us to our sense of humanity, whether it's feeling something we need to apologize or write, or fulfilling the wish. I often at Bennington have the great pleasure of teaching with the wonderful writer Amy Hempel, and she has a brilliant story that she said grew out of an assignment in her class, which was, to write your worst secret. And
Okay. That's
I mean, and so I often think about, I have told my students, if they know what stands to hurt this character, what's the kryptonite for that person, or if you know what that person loves more than anything else, you've pretty much got what you need to build a character. So when I'm thinking about my characters, I'm often thinking, okay, so what is it that nobody knows about this person?
Well, let me ask you about that, because one of the things that, unless I somehow missed it, and I don't think I did, one of the intriguing questions that remains unanswered after reading this book involves Lil and Frank in the early years of their marriage, when they were very young and very in love and afraid that some tragic accident might separate them through one dying and leaving the other behind, which is understandable given what happened to their parents. And so they decide that they're going to create a secret word that no one else will know, so that if one does pass on and exist in some state beyond the physical, that word, should it occur in the other person's life in some manner, would be a signal that I'm here and I'm with you, which I think is really lovely. But I don't think you ever tell us the word in the novel. And I'm assuming that was intentional. And some two-part question. Obviously, I think that was intentional, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. 2, do you have the word in your mind? And 3, will you tell us what it is?
Oh, that's a great question. There were a lot of things I did leave out. I never gave Lil's mother a name. At one point, she says to her children in the letter she's writing, my mother is there at Mount Feek Cemetery. I miss visiting. I hope you'll go one day. And there's a reference to a name carved in stone, but we don't know the name, which is the kind of thing that gets lost. I do have a word in mind, and I went back and forth as to whether or not I was going to reveal it. And for a long time, I was superstitious. Given the way you phrased that question, which I liked very much, I will tell you what I think their word was. Yeah. Now maybe they changed it, but I always loved the story of the Houdinis. That's where I got that, because they had this whole plan. And I'm getting there, but the other story.
Take your time. This is your story.
The other story I will tell that inspired that. And I don't know if I put it in the essay or not. But my dad, who died way too young, almost 30 years ago, came home from work one day. He worked at the post office on the window, and he was like, just very moved. He had had this amazing day. And he said it was because this man he had never seen before came up to the window, very well dressed, and said to my dad, "Is everything copacetic?" And my dad said, the only person I've ever heard use that word is my dad. And this was a total stranger. He never saw him again. And he really felt this kind of wonderful emotional connection with his dad. And, regardless of what we believe in I'm probably a little more woo-woo than many, but regardless of what we believe, that there is something to me so beautiful in those emotional connections that can happen around a single word, or a memory, a word that stimulates a memory. So I spent a lot of time thinking about Lil and Frank's word because I wanted to find something that I had never actually heard anybody say. And I finally found a word. It's a Hebrew letter. It's spelled Tzzddi and pronounced Zadi. And the symbol for it is a fish hook. And Frank's earliest work was researching man's earliest tools and these fish hooks carved from bone. And
I remember that scene. I love it. Thank you for sharing that word. So now those of you out there, you know something that maybe nobody else in the country or the world knows. So thank you for sharing that with us.
No, I really have not shared it. I think with one other, but at one point my editor even said, no, you don't have to tell me. But at the time, I don't know how you feel as a writer. I sometimes feel that if I tell too much too soon, it takes the magic out of it. Speaking of secrets, I mean, part of the writing process for me, I feel like I'm driven by the secrecy of what's in my head that is not yet on the paper, if that makes
sense. If you share it verbally, you tend to lose that impetus. I've experienced that as well. I love that you just used the word magic, because I'm going to compliment you a little bit more, because there's a real richness to your character development. I mean, you go so deeply into these people. I mean, you really, as the reader, you know who you're dealing with. They still have their secrets, but you get into the granular parts of their lives. I mean, what they carry in their pockets, what are their fears, what are their best childhood memories, all these things, so that by the time you reach the end of the novel, there's very little question of who these characters are, except for the ones that you choose to hold back. And you do that so well, but there are all these unexpected little bits of magic. And one of them that really stuck with me was an older couple nearing, it's not Lil and Frank, I think it was parents or grandparents, but there's the scene where the old man comes home at the end of the day, compliments his wife on the smell of her cooking, says he wants to sit by the window and listen to the sound of music from outside. He sits by the window and dies in that chair. And what I loved about that, the magic about that, was that his wife wasn't cooking. The chicken was still uncooked in the sink. There was no music playing outside. And the way she perceived that was that it was an affirmation of another place, of a better place, that at the end, as he was dying, he smelled what he wanted to smell and heard what he wanted to hear. And then he sort of went there, I guess. I mean, is that, I mean, because that's so hopeful, right? And really lovely. And there's some dark, despairing times in the book. So I thought that was a nice touch.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, that was exactly my intention. And in my prior novel, Life After Life, I did write a lot about that, because I'm intrigued. I grew up with a lot of older relatives I loved very much, and my mother is still in skilled nursing care there in Lumberton, and I go back and forth, and I have a creative writing group there. We meet monthly, and we have the best time. But COVID cost us a little over a year, and one of our beloved members just left us, and and we all know that grief and the sadness we feel, but I think we also you look around in society, and we see all the deaths that are not after a long well-lived life, and so I think, where am I going with this? Just the most inevitable fact of life is that it will end.
Well, this novel looks at that pretty
Talk about it, but
well. In your novel, it looks at that unflinchingly, and yet I think it also addresses the circle of life. We see Frank at the end of his life, and then Harvey, this young boy, at the very beginning of his. There again, I don't want to give anything away, but there's a wonderful moment between them at the end of the novel, where you kind of get that sense, and there's this continuing circle of young, old, and the life in between. And yet, one of the things I loved about the imagery of that, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it happens near the train tracks where the father was killed all those years ago. And so you've got this image of this circle of life represented by this young boy and this old man, which is very different from tracks that just run straight and true. And I think I love the way you ended it, but the tracks that run straight and true to the north. Was that intentional? I mean, is that juxtaposition, or did you just get lucky? Because sometimes we get lucky.
Well, there was a lot of luck, because I had no idea when I started investigating, really reading about the train wreck. Lo and behold, many of the people on that train headed north. Many people coming home from the war for Christmas. It was right before Christmas. A lot of the people on the train were from Lowell, Massachusetts, which is where I had put Frank's childhood home. And that was lucky. And so, yeah, I grew up not far from the railroad tracks, and we would go out as kids and put pennies and do all those things they told us not to do. And I live right near a train. I hear every day now, here in Hillsborough. And so I'm always aware of those things. I remember moving to Boston years ago, and somebody saying, "How can it feel like home to you?" And I'm like, well, I'm still just a spit from I-95, and I can get to the ocean in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels similar in that way. And I think things like trains and water often do it for me.
Well, maybe it's a Southern thing, but the sound of the trains coming through Salisbury, where I grew up, was very much a part of my childhood. I heard it all the time. And yet, okay, so again, I don't want to give away much of the ending, but one of the things I loved is this older couple is looking back on their life. And again, they've dealt with their losses, they've dealt with their regrets. I couldn't figure out how you were going to resolve this story. And I love the way you did it. And I just want to make an observation that I found it very life affirming, just very peaceful. Like there's a real sense of peace in these folks as they're at that stage of life. I got to tell a funny story because we have the Figure Eight book club here. And I'll tell it fast because this is your time, not mine, but it's sort of funny. When my first novel came out, The King of Lies, I was down at Figure Eight for the summer. My family's had a house there for a long time. And I would go to the yacht club to write every day for about 5 or 6 hours. And it was always empty during those early hours. And this one day I was sitting at a table, I was working on my second novel, Downriver, and the only other people in the whole place were about 3 tables away. And it was a group of ladies playing bridge. And, of course, I can hear everything they're saying, and I'm just typing away. And one of them lays a card and says, so I hear John Hart's on the island. And another lady says, oh, is that right? Lays the card. Did you read his book? Oh, yeah, I read his book. Lays a card. What did you think about it? Readable. And I'm just like, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, my gosh, after I spent a year of my life writing that book and I get readable. Anyway, that's for the Figure Eight people.
I was going to say that. I mean, those are scary stories. I feel every writer part of me curling into a cocoon as I start to listen.
Well, it worked out okay because when I moved to Charlottesville 10 years ago, I'll never forget. I hadn't met Grisham yet. We're buddies now, but the first time I ever saw him, we were sitting in the same restaurant, and there was a table of folks between us. And I happened to turn around in time to see one of the ladies at the table pointing from John to me and saying, I can't believe they're both here. And I was like, okay, that makes up for readable. I can live with that.
That is wonderful. Yes. And what a nice, wonderful person.
Well, and we both know John and Renee. We're both
yes,
blessed to live in
I think
writerly towns.
Renee.
Who else is in Hillsborough now? I know that there used to be a lot of writers there. They're still the case?
Lee Smith,
Lee Smith.
Alan Perganis, Michael Malone.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
David Payne. We lost Randall Keenan, much to my great sadness. But yeah, my John Grisham story, the first time I ever met him, I was on a panel with him years and years ago. And, afterwards, the painful experience of signing books. And he had a line like out the door and around the building. So like I'm writing to people, now, where did your mama grow up? And I'm like writing a whole novel in the book so I can have two people there.
Oh, it's horrible. We've all been there. We've all been there. I mean, my first time like that was just nightmarish. I mean, I had nobody, and I won't name the other writer, but he was a big guy and stuff was going out the door, it seems. You mentioned earlier that you have a writing group. And I find that there are a lot of lines that divide writers, not in a bad way, but some outline, some don't. I'm a Grope and Hope guy myself. Some love writing groups. I can't imagine really speaking about what I'm trying to do with other people. How do you like, I mean, obviously you like the writing group experience. Has that been a good thing for you?
This is a writing group I direct. Like
you're the seasoned pro, the teacher. Because I know you've carried that role a lot. You've taught at a lot of prestigious places. Okay,
and these are people who live in the Wesley Pines community, where my mom is, and I started doing it. I visited to talk about writing, and I thought, well, my mom can come and sit and listen and enjoy. And that she wasn't doing well enough for that, but by then I was really attached to the group, and also I was working on this book, and in the beginning there was someone there who had just wonderful memories, as my dad had, about that particular train crash. So I learn a lot from them, and I do. I really appreciate that you felt a kind of peacefulness, because I do think I'm both an optimist and a realist, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't want to look away from what is dark and hard in life, but I also don't want to lose sight of all the little things that we cling to, and so I'm big on memory, and the average day. I mean, and I think this pandemic has left us all so appreciating just the normal day, get up, drink a cup of coffee, go wherever it is you go.
Shake a hand, give a hug. I mean, it's crazy.
Go to the movies,
You mentioned, movies. That's my great gift to myself as a writer. It's all storytelling. So if I finish at noon on a Tuesday, I'll go see 2 movies if I want. I've really missed that.
That is my guilty pleasure as well. There's nothing like a movie right in the middle of the day when you're the only person in the theater.
Good for you. I love it. Well, you mentioned memory, and I'm coming back to your essay, because this is how you end your essay, and I'm only sharing this to reinforce what you were saying. You write, "My hope is that the readers of Hieroglyphics will be entertained by these characters in their lives, but I also hope it will lead them to think of various fragments and images from their own lives and to experience the oldest and purest form of time travel, memory." And I think you do that really well in the book, because there is a lot of back and forth, young lives, old lives. You do it in a very easy to follow way. Again, you see these characters through so many eras of their lives, their young lives, their old lives, and everything in between. One of the other things you do really well is, we talk about the secrets and the things that you choose to reveal and the things that you choose to not reveal. And you do a really great job with your character Shelley in choosing to reveal something at the end that gives us a lot of perspective on her, something that, you know, was sort of murky in her life, that sort of shaped her in a very fundamental way, is revealed in a quite dramatic fashion. And I won't get into the details of that unless you wish to, but I saw in one of the questions in your reader's guide, and I'm going to steal it, that we see her, the last we see of her, she's literally standing in the threshold of an open door. And the question becomes, you know, what does that represent for her? And I wonder if you wanted to just talk about Shelley for just a minute, and if you're willing to share that, because this is a struggling woman who's got reasons for her struggles, but a really good heart. And we really want to see her get to a better place. And at the end, she really is she's in this threshold. It's almost as if she could go forwards or in reverse. And do you have any thoughts you want to share about Shelley?
Oh, I totally do. Shelley is someone who really has tried to close the door on a painful past and is just doing the best that she can. The kind of character on the page and in life that I'm always pulling for, you know. And I think if I had to start throwing out words that describe what I feel I write over and over and over, I do feel I write a lot about a kind of redemption or second chance. I mean, I think our losses and our failures really shape us. They're our best teachers, you know. We are who we are. And I think when we hide from those losses and failures, we really miss a wonderful opportunity to cross a threshold and come into a new place. And that's where Shelley is right now. I think, and I think there are a lot of Shelleys out there, you know, people who have had very little support in life to help them through, and scrapping and doing the best they can. And so I'm pulling for her. I had a lot of fun writing her because I like those characters with no filters. It's why I like old characters and kids, you know. There's nothing monitoring what gets said. It goes straight from the brain out the mouth. And Shelley is so trying to distract herself in daily life so as not to look back. It's like she's running from something. So her voice is on a higher speed.
Well, your people are all very human. I mean, that's one of the things I admire in reading this book is, again, their frailties, their strengths, and capable of great self-reflection and also great self-deception. It's very well done. I know we have a few more minutes only before Kimberly's going to come back and open the floor for questions. So I want to give you an opportunity to discuss two things, as much or as little as you like. First, are there other thematic elements in this book that you would like to make the reader aware of? Because I feel like there's a lot to think about in this book. And secondly, and this is always an interesting question for writers, and it's about the genesis of the title. And was that a struggle for you? Did it come easily? And how do you think it speaks to the book?
Yeah, you know, the title question may actually answer it. I was thinking very much about the little scraps we leave behind. I don't know about you and what your process is, but I'm a compulsive note taker, and so everywhere I have these, you know, these sticky pads, and you know, and I put them everywhere. And when I'm collecting ideas for a novel, I just sort of keep stuffing them in a big envelope and then look at it. And so it was the thought, you know, to someone who doesn't have the vision I have in my head of what's coming, this just looks like a mess. it looks like what Siri does when I try to record a note, because she can't do my accent. And so I think I'm telling her something really important. And when I get where I'm going, it's just gobbledygook. It's hieroglyphics. And then that expanded, and I began thinking of all the little objects we save. Again, since childhood, I've been someone who collects rocks and leaves and things, with the idea, now I'll always remember I was here because I have this. Sometimes it works better than others, but I basically have rocks and more rocks in my world. So, and what was the other part? I got off track.
Just if there are any other broader thematic elements you want to make the reader aware of to sort of look for as they go.
Well, I think it's I'm the character Lil is who I admire most in terms of the way she examines life, because she's that person who's going to get a flashlight and look in every dark corner with the hope of understanding something. And I do think I feel that way. I think that facing something, admitting something, accountability, all of those elements of humanity. And I try not to, pull a pulpit onto the page, or or strongly political for that matter. And yet I feel I just feel compelled, to really try to hit what I see as some ethical marks along the way, just and also the idea that that it's never too late, if the hill is going down, to turn and try to go back up.
Well, it's interesting.
And so, as I said, yeah, an optimistic realist, but
I think that's a great way to be, and it's so interesting because at the core, this really does seem to be Frank and Lil's story. I mean, everybody is an important character, but it's really about them, and they're so different. Here's Lil in her 80s, and she's actively excavating the memories of her life. I mean, she's going back through these notes that you talk about. She's kept a journal. She's really almost reliving her life through letters to her children and these notes. And here's Frank, her husband, who is, I guess he's an archaeologist by trade. He's a university professor who has spent his whole life digging for deeper truths. And yet it seems that it's only at the very end of his life that he's actually willing to excavate his own past. And I'm not sure if I read that correctly, but
you totally read that correctly. And it's really her urging that forces him into the place. Mm-hmm. And in writing the book, for a long time, I had no idea how Shelley and Harvey even were going to connect with Lil and Frank. And then somewhere along the line, in that messy draft, I realized, Frank's boyhood home is where they're living, so suddenly it was like its own dig. Harvey is growing up on top of where mm-hmm. Frank grew up. And as soon as I knew that, it really helped pull it.
You have beautiful sort of thematic imagery. I think the way that the characters interact with some of these larger elements of life in the story, I really appreciate that part of the book. So let me ask you this as a writer, not so much about hieroglyphics, but do you outline, I'm guessing from all the notes that you take that you do, or do you make it up as you go?
Most of it is made up as I go, but mm-hmm. I have these little fragments of things that I know have a place in there. So it's messy for a very long time, and so at one point I would just write one character. Much of Lil's sections were written together. And I wasn't sure, am I going to have separate parts of each character? And then no, that made no sense. And so there was a lot of chopping up longer sections to piece together, which I loved. I love doing that. It's a messy way to go. Do you outline?
No, I don't know how anybody could outline a novel. I've
I
tried
don't
it.
either.
And I could spend a month or 2 months or a year creating an outline, but by page 5, it's rendered a moot document because I get more excited about this character, this idea, and suddenly all this work is meaningless because I can't let go
Right.
of some new thought. And invariably, that leads to 2 things, sleepless nights and better novels. You know,
I agree. I mean,
worth it though.
but anytime I was ever assigned, to write a paper with index cards and an outline, I wrote the paper and then had to go back.
Yeah. I've met writers that'll do 200-page outlines. They'll spend 6 months. And my question to them is, where's the fun in that? I mean, once you have your outline, you're just building widgets. I love the idea of getting up every morning.
Yeah, I feel like you lose some of that.
Yeah, wondering where's the magic, and where's this story going to go, and how am I going to be surprised as the writer? And that's one of the great joys, because look, this is a hard, tedious business. I mean, it's not all martinis and slippers. I mean, this is hard work.
Yes.
And if you suck all the joy out of it, I think that it would be tough. Now, the other side of the joy really is the sleepless night issue, because I have found myself 300 pages in and in a hole and uncertain how I'm going to finish the book. Fortunately, that's only happened once, but it was a hard once.
Well, it's scary when you're in that place where you still believe in what you're doing, but it's hard to imagine how it's all going to come together.
I call it a year-long sustained leap of faith, and sometimes it's 2 years. But it's a sustained leap of faith.
That's a great description. I do a lot of that.
Do you have thoughts on your next book? Or, I mean, I imagine that it's always percolating.
I'm working on short stories right now.
Okay.
A lot of times when I'm working on a novel, I get these little, ideas for stories and sort of put them off to the side. So that's where I am.
I've always heard, and I can imagine it true, that short stories are much more difficult to write than long form.
They are for me.
Yeah,
they really are.
Every word just has to make so much of an impact.
And it's a challenge, but I really enjoy it. I enjoy reading short stories, so it's a nice shift.
Mm-hmm. I'm terrified of short stories. Novels give me room for error. Kimberly, how we doing?
Well, there are some questions from attendees, but I don't want to interrupt y'all's chat.
We'll riff on the questions too. It's fine.
Sure.
Let's make sure that anybody has a question gets it answered. And I think Jill and I we're not going to run out of things to talk about. I can promise you.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure to be a fly on the wall to hear. The first question is for Jill, a comment that you have such a sensitivity to human emotions. Did you get this from your mother or your father or other relatives, or is this something that's just you?
Oh.
Or were you just born this way?
Well, I think I've always been inclined that way, but of the two, my dad was definitely probably the more emotional that way. My dad would often say something like, "This would make a good story," so he was sort of intrigued by that, the imagination, and so I give him a lot of credit.
Let me ask a question as kind of a follow-up for that, because Jill, you've taught creative writing. You've obviously written a great deal. Lots of writers. What thoughts, if any, do you have about what makes a writer? I mean, because I know I've always heard people say, well, you can't teach someone to write. They're either writers or they're not. I don't know if that's true, but what broad observations have you made about what it takes to be a writer and what separates great writers from people like me?
Well, first of all, you cannot put yourself in that category, because you clearly have all the tools, the the talent, the imagination, and the self-discipline, and I think it's got to be that combination, because you can teach a lot. You can, people can learn to write a good, strong sentence. It doesn't always mean a great storyteller, and I think what we do as fiction writers, we're telling a story, and we're trying to let the reader feel as if they're experiencing it as it happens. And I don't know, I like to think that what we do is just a grown-up version of childhood imaginary play. I told somebody recently, I'm not sitting here with a beach towel and a cardboard crown, but I might as well be. I feel like when I write, I feel that kind of freedom. And so there are times now, revision I think of as more like work, but that first draft sometimes feels so akin to play that I've had a hard time sometimes giving myself permission, just because it feels like such an indulgence.
Oh, see, that's wonderful. I go into every book just filled with angst, that I'm not going to be able to deliver. And I don't have the joy. I have joys when I luck my way or find my way to a really perfect sentence or a perfect chapter ending. Then I really enjoy those moments, but the spaces in between can get pretty heavy sometimes. But I think, the one thing I would say in terms of this question of what every writer of fiction really has to have, and it ties into the question about your emotional breadth with your characters, it is this question of true empathy. I think that if you cannot truly feel what someone like Shelley in her dire circumstances, or Frank at the end of his life, or this young boy dealing with his own quite peculiar issues, if you can't put yourself in those shoes and deliver perspective convincingly, it's kind of pointless. And it's the one blessing that I really feel in my life as a writer, is that I can slip in and out of those characters pretty easily, even characters that I despise. And I'm sure that people wonder if that makes us bad people somehow. But anyway, that's just my observation. I think that really matters.
No, in fact, I think it is. Oh, sorry, dog in the room. I'm going to open the door. Run. Sorry about that. The COVID life. I was going to say, I think it's a great, again, lesson in humanity, because it's so easy to just place judgment and put a person in this category or that category. Rarely does that work. We all have many categories, and I always tell my students that you take a character you cannot stand and find something you admire or something that makes you sympathetic to their childhood or what might have put them in that direction. And it's not as easy. It doesn't mean that you think what they've done is right, but there's a kind of understanding that comes with that more in-depth look, and it's complicated. And so I never like to have a character that I'm always looking for, where did the saint go wrong, and where did the villain do a good thing, or something.
That's good. And I worry, and I saw something the other day, just blew my mind. I worry about cancel culture finding its way to fiction. There's a well-known writer who was in the news recently. I don't know if you saw this. Had two young girls, one of whom was living in secret in her friend's attic or garage, I can't remember. And the young girl who was hiding her made some reference to, it's like Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank, which I mean, I think it's a very reasonable thing for a 12-year-old character to say to another 12-year-old character, they've obviously read the story in school. Here's a young person hiding away. And yet some people became outraged, and now the publisher and the author are apologizing and saying they're going to take that line out of any future editions of the book. And that terrifies me, because it's such a dangerous, slippery slope when we have to be able to get in and out of characters and reveal them without thinking about all the millions of people out there that might take offense over something is, to me, inoffensive as a 12-year-old referencing Anne Frank. I mean, I'm not asking you to weigh in on this because I don't like bringing politics into these things, but as a novelist, I find it horrifying.
Well, it's definitely a slippery slope and a very difficult one.
Well, one of the first things I learned is that you cannot, and I know this from the critics, you cannot make everybody happy. I mean, one critic will love what you've done and another will have their issues. And if I have to start worrying about keeping every single person happy with every depiction of every character and every scene, I'm just going to retire and work on my farm.
Yeah, I mean, I think we cannot please all the people, and I don't want to be responsible for my characters in that way either. I kind of feel like if we as novelists are God of the universe, I kind of give these people free will.
Yeah.
Or that's and on a good day it feels like taking dictation. The scene is going on and they're talking, and so yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, Kimberly.
I think safe fiction is boring fiction. I mean, you have to have a certain exploratory sense of fearlessness to try different things with different characters. And anyway, that's a big, broad topic, and I see Kimberly probably got another question for us.
Well, no, I'm so glad you brought it up. We are 1 minute over our 2 minutes now over our end time. But your conversation is so lovely. I'm not doing my job, which is keeping us on track. The next question, and we'll ask John this question, and then the last question will be, what authors do you read? But John, this one's for you. It's a question from someone who's just encountering you for the first time today. And has heard from someone else that your book's one of The Last Child's his favorite book of all time. And the question is to ask you to explain a few of your books and in your writing and kind of pitch yourself, if you will.
Yeah, I'll try to do it in a brief manner if I can. I'm a big believer in the power of character and of relationships. And I think that matters. And if I can take very real people, put them into dire circumstances that reveal them more deeply through their actions, and do it in a way that builds ever increasing tension, that's what I aspire to do. But I always put the characters first. I'm kind of a Southern Gothic writer in a lot of ways, and that means different things to different people. But for me, I feel very tied to place. I write my novels set in North Carolina. In my mind's eye, I usually see the town I grew up in. I believe that the things that happen to all of us in childhood are the things that inform us as adults. So most of my stories will have some element from childhood, usually traumatic, some way or another, that reveals itself in adulthood and brings the characters a deeper understanding of why they are the way they are. I've been accused, and I use that word half jokingly, half seriously, of writing dark. And I don't think that's fair. The way I like to describe my books is that I believe in the greatness of humanity, things like faith, altruism, trust, love, family, sacrifice, all of these things that make people great. And yet in real life, they don't necessarily shine so brightly because they can be small decisions to put someone over ourselves, to take the hard path instead of the easy one. So what I like to do is to take these people, make them as real and sympathetic as I can, again, even if they're not good people, but then put them into a really dangerous, difficult, even dark situation so that these flickers of humanity, the things that define us, have an opportunity to shine a little more brightly, and we can see them in meaningful ways as the character evolves through the story. So What I really do is I write about the search for light in dark places. I don't write about dark places, but rather the other. How do mostly normal people, and I've done a couple of the top characters, but mostly well-grounded people, how do they find their way through some horrible, unanticipated circumstance that could either leave them fetal and weeping or somehow give them the strength to overcome. And every story that I write is very, very different. I really love the standalone. That might be too rambling and not on point, but that's the best I can do with the clock ticking.
Oh, I love what you say about, relying on things from childhood. I mean, it's the greatest, forgive the cuckoo clock. It's like the greatest bag of tricks any writer can have. I mean, I tell my students that all the time.
Great.
The last question is what authors do the two of you read?
Jill, why don't you go first?
Oh boy, that is a big long list. I mean, I may just name some recent things I've read that I really admire. Daniel Mason's stories, A Registry of My Passage on Earth, Julia Alvarez's Afterlife, that just came out this summer, Margot Livesey's The Boy in the Field. And I'm reading now, a lot of times when I'm writing, I tend to read nonfiction and a lot of poetry. And right now I'm nearing the end of James Carroll's amazing book, The Truth at the Heart of the Lie, about the Catholic Church scandals.
Nice. Well, my answer is not nearly so impressive. I suffer from a disease I call voice creep, which means if I'm reading as I'm writing, I start to internalize someone else's voice and bastardize it and put it into my own work. So that, for instance, if I read 4 books over the course of 100 pages, there could be 100 pages of my own writing. There could be 4 distinct variations of voice in those 100 pages. So it's, I'll give you, for instance, my wife reads what I write chapter by chapter. And when my first novel came out, I was getting a lot of comparisons to James Lee Burke, who I've never read at the time. I've read him since, and I find him lovely. I started reading one of his books while I was writing Downriver, and he's a very mellifluous, elegant Southern writer. And when my wife took the pages I wrote as I read that book, she said, what happened here? And when I asked her what she meant, she said, well, you're doing your thing, and all of a sudden here it's as if you vomited sugar water onto the page. And I realized what she meant. I was trying to sound like James Lee Burke, and only James Lee Burke can do that. That's a fool's errand. So I don't read as much as I would like. And when I do, it's usually something that can affect me. It's historical fiction. I don't care a lot for nonfiction, but I'll read science fiction, stuff like that. I'm an escapist. That's what I really enjoy when I read, or those sorts of things. So without going into a list of what I like to read, that's kind of where I am. It's a hardship for me as a writer that I can't embrace the reading part as much as I used to.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here, for bringing so much of yourselves to this conversation. This has been a true treat, and for also giving us the extra 8 minutes of your time. I appreciate
for
that.
The Figure 8 Book Club.
And thank you for the Figure 8 Book Club. I'm about to turn around and go sell everybody y'all's books. But for those of you participating from home, and who registered, I'll send out a video of this, and please feel free to forward it on to friends. And we'll have the link to buy copies of everybody's books in that email as well. And thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. What a pleasure. I look forward to being there in person. And John, I really look forward to meeting you in person. This has been a wonderful conversation. We could have talked another hour.
I know. I think when you come down to Southern Pines, we need to invite John down and do it again.
Maybe when his next book comes out, I'll interview him. You did What a
Yes.
great interview. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jill. And should you come back to the Charlottesville area for the Festival of the Book or any other reason, please reach out. I'd love to meet you in person.
I will indeed. I will indeed.
All right. Well, thank you all. And read this book. It's really worth your time. I promise.
Thank you.